welcome to this week's The Shortlist. It is March 3rd. Welcome to spring. Spring is in the air here in the Northern Hemisphere. By God, we need it. We need to have some sort of view that things are getting better as we come to you from lockdown. I think all of us are still stuck in lockdown, still getting quite pissed off at lockdown as well, and wanting things to change. So hopefully there's some optimism. Hopefully the sun is in the air, the flowers are springing where you are, and you are feeling energetic. So today's show is how you got to love them or you're going to lose them. Love them or lose them. Love them or lose them. What are we talking about? Your partner, your best friend? No, we're talking about your team, your employees. We're talking today about the engagement-focused leader on this show. Are you new to the show? Quick reminder, if you're new to the show, this is a weekly show. We broadcast live on LinkedIn and YouTube. Those of you listening live, we want your questions and comments. Please join in. Those of you who are not listening live, you must be listening to our podcasts or watching a playback. We're a live show on YouTube and LinkedIn. We're also a podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your good podcasts. You can find more about the show, our upcoming lineup, and our previous shows of 30 or 40 shows at this point by going to socialtalent.com/the shortlist. And today's guest is coming back to us. She's a returning guest, but I'll tell you about her in just a second. Because in the last year, leadership has really come to the fore as a topic. And we're going to be talking today about leadership, whether you're a recruiting leader, whether you're a leader of sales, whether you're a leader of the organization, you run your own business, a leader of two people. But even if you're not, these are lessons that you can hopefully learn for when you are becoming a leader, and even a better way to evaluate your own leader. So in this kind of newer world of work as it's emerging in 2020, we are seeing how remote work, particularly in the lockdown environment, has really kind of driven high levels of uncertainty for folks out there, right? And people are anxious. The anxiety levels are really, really high. And employees are really looking to their managers for guidance. And not just about how I do my work, but often about how I deal with all this stuff going on in my life. And we want to talk to you about what actions a great leader can take to keep her or his team engaged. I'm delighted to say this week we're joined again by Dr. Beverly Kaye, author, speaker, thought leader, fantastic person. And Bev is celebrating the launch of the sixth edition of her fantastic book entitled Love 'Em or Lose 'Em, which has just been released. You can find that on Amazon or any good bookshop that's open. And Bev is going to be taking us today through three clusters, if I'm not mistaken, Bev, that you've identified that engagement-focused managers need to take on board. And they are development and growth, relationships, and culture. And your advice, as you've had on the show before, and as I've come to know over the last few years, is sage-worthy and deep in not just great experience, but actionable good practices that every leader should follow. And I'm looking forward to hearing more of it today. Bev, I wonder if you wouldn't mind starting by reintroducing yourself to some of our listeners who perhaps haven't had the absolute pleasure of hearing you on the show before, and perhaps haven't invested in your books and understood a little bit more about the world you come from.
Okay, thank you. So I come from decades in the talent management arena, and I plan to stay till I can't talk anymore. And my work is in the area of career development, retention, and engagement. And the ideas in this book that I'm going to talk about first were published in 1999. So the book is 20 years old. And in the late 90s, McKinsey published something called the War for Talent. And there was a war going on for talent. I think there always was, and there always will be. But they said, and everybody remembered this, people don't leave organizations. They do leave managers. And everyone caught that phrase. But where it was tough is we know that. But how do you do something? And for managers who haven't been given the how-tos, that's what motivated us to write the book. And we struggled on how to write it to make a busy manager want to read it. And after several tries, we organized it according to the alphabet. We literally sat in a hotel room and plastered the alphabet on the wall and tried to say, what does our data tell us that could be A and B, etc. And Z was hard and X was hard, but we figured it out. So the whole alphabet is mired in the many, many research approaches that we took. Surveys and even interviewing people after they left an organization and saying, why did you really leave? So we were interested in why people stay, not why they go. Mm-hmm. So our surveys all said, what keeps you in your organization? And that's what we looked at to give us the data.
So, Ben, I'm dying to get into the three big kind of topics or pillars we're going to discuss today. We're going to do something different. We always take the news, but this week, what we're going to do is we're going to spread the news over these three topics throughout the show. I think it's the best way to give a real focus on each of these. So I'm going to ask Niall to play our jingle, and we're going to get into our first news story. And we're going to use that first news story to talk about the topic of development and growth. Over to you, Niall. So in this first pillar, Bev, right, on development and growth, what we did, we looked to an article that was published by Gallup back towards the end of January. And this article by Gallup by Rob Desimone and Jennifer Robison was entitled 3 Employee Development Interventions for 2021. And the article was written from the perspective of we've just closed out 2020, and people are making plans for 2021. And Gallup, kind of in summary, are saying human development should be at the heart of initiatives to promote and optimize engagement and productivity. I'm going to guess you may have more experience than both of these authors put together. But talk to me about employee development and interventions in the context of the development and growth pillar. And maybe start by maybe referencing, if you don't mind, this article, but then maybe expand a little bit about on that pillar. What does development and growth mean for you? And maybe some of the A to Z that you uncovered in your research on this.
So I loved reading the Gallup article. I love that it says human development should be at the heart of initiatives to promote and optimize. And a couple things that I circled in that statement. One was the heart of the initiative to promote and optimize. And one of the career issues I have, and I've always had, is with the word promote. And the development equals promote. And I've tried every which way to say it's more than promote, which conjures up. So I've written a book several different ways, but it's always been titled Up is Not the Only Way. And I feel like I'm singing it from rooftops and still trying to get organizations to hear it, because talent mobility now is the word that's being used, and it's big. So when Sharon and I finished the book, it was 26 chapters. We said, how are we going to teach it? Because we also are into helping people learn. And we divided the chapters into 3 clusters. And here's just a quick peek at the development and growth chapter. So there it is. All of these words, and they probably make sense to you, and they're probably self-explanatory. But what I'm going to do is just hit 3. I'm going to hit careers. I'm going to hit opportunities. And in a way, I've already hit goals. But come back to me, Niall. Careers. And, I want you to know there's an S on the end of the word careers, because no longer do we have one career. We have many. And those many, some of which we never dreamed of. I went to school to be an elementary school teacher. I didn't like kids, but that was what I did. And through a surprise series, I ended up building an organization and building a career in talent development. So the idea of multiple careers and knowing for every manager out there how to talk to your people about their careers. And if you've never had a manager of yours talk to you about your career, it's hard to talk to someone else. So that book has a great chapter. And for any individual out there, it's not only your manager's job to say, let's talk. It's your job too, to have done some thinking and then say, let's talk. And of course, about more than one goal. And in the book, we talk about having career leverage. And so for every manager out there who fears the career discussion, write the word LEVERR on a little card in front of you and talk about lateral moves, enrichment moves, vertical moves, exploratory moves, things you can try, gigs. LEVE. The first R is realignment. Maybe you put a brilliant engineer into a management job and you can see, no, it doesn't excite them. Can they go back? And the last R is relocation, meaning maybe your organization, and I'd fight for it to not be one they want to leave. And now with talent mobility being so strong, I would send them into the organization first to look for what it is they really want before you let them go. And then opportunity. And I can talk about this in maybe 2 sentences. You're either opportunity minded or you're opportunity blinded. And yes, I talk in riddles and poems and ways to make it memorable. I am opportunity minded to such a degree that I'm scattered because everything looks like an opportunity for me. Every elevator I step into is an opportunity for me. But being opportunity blinded means you shut down and you literally have blinders on. And when there's a reshuffle in your organization, your knee jerk is, woe is me. Now what's going to happen? Instead of, well, who are the new leaders? What can I do to let them know I'm here, etc. So I don't expect managers to do all of those, but I do expect them to say to an individual, which of these do you want me to do more of? And that, my friends, is a great way to start. And we will make sure that you can access a handout that names all of these, definitely. So careers are critical. And Johnny, I read some of your discussion questions, and one of them grabbed me because you say, why do you agree that focusing is on individual strength is really good? Right? That was one you thought up.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, yes, there's a strength movement. Know your strengths, Marcus Buckingham, etc. But there is some research from the Center for Creative Leadership. They have a book, I think it's titled The Perils of Strengths. Because if you concentrate only on your strengths and you take a strength to excess, it can get you and become your greatest weakness. One quick example is one of my strengths is that I'm really creative. And I love thinking of new ways to do things. So I owned an organization. I was the CEO we had a strategic plan, and my leadership team had a hard time with me because I would always say, let's do that. Let's do that. And it's not part of the strategy, Beverly. So you could get too creative, which is what I do and still do. So that's the essence of career. And Johnny, I wonder I'm interviewing you now. Which one, if you remember the whole constellation, is your worst?
I'm going to ask Nod to bring that back up, and I'm going to call them out for our listeners who aren't viewing. So
Right.
We've got careers, support them, support growth, opportunities, mind them, mentor, be one, link, create connections, hire, fit is first, goals, expand options, enrich, energize the job. So when I look at those, I guess, I put focus on. So if I'm going to pick one that I in the last year tried to do more, I was mentoring. And it's not something I knew much about more formally. Obviously, I looked at my own team and tried to look at working with them. But we kind of did this when we went into COVID a year ago, Bev, March 2020. And we kind of had to say, listen, we got to pull back a bit. We don't have the resources. We didn't anticipate maybe we'd have the resources to really fund the development of our team as much as possible. So we said, why aren't we doing more on mentorship? And can we mentor folks who aren't in your team? And it's we're a year into this experiment, and we I think 8 or 10 of us took the role of mentor for somebody who wasn't in their team, and we've been working with those folks. And I tell you, it's we've met as mentors to share learnings about what's working for each of them, because sometimes as a mentor you run out of ideas, and to say to somebody, be a mentor to Bev, they cannot, it's a responsibility that requires, dare I say it, a job spec, and you need instruction on what does good mentorship look like. And we've shared that, and I've learned from my colleagues and how they've mentored others and taken that feedback, and it's been a fantastic experience. Hopefully good for the people we've been mentoring as well. Just to kind of take a regular, and we in Social Talent do it on a weekly basis, weekly mentorship. And I've learned I've taken on a mentorship from our chairperson. And that's been really helpful as well. So I've been able to see what I need as a mentee and try to then think about what somebody I'm mentoring might get. So that's been the one that I probably chose a year ago as the one I was weakest in, not doing enough and worked on. Right. But do you mind if I bring you back to a point, just to the top of the point around, you said that, people look at, progression and upward mobility. And you mentioned obviously the book Up Is Not the Only Way. This resonated really well. I'll tell you a story, Bev. I had a conversation with a customer, and the customer was telling me how her team a year ago had signaled in an employee engagement survey that they wanted more career development opportunities. And this leader listened to that signal and said, we need to basically really invest in their training and education. And so she really kind of invested in their training and education, and then resurveyed them a year later, and they found that they hadn't changed their score on career development. She was stunned by this, going, I've put so much education and effort into them. So she started talking one-on-one with some of the team. And it turns out what they meant by career development was, guess what? Bigger salary and more job titles. Right. And I just saw how it was misinterpreted. And, this was a leader saying, I don't have the ability to give them more job titles. Not everybody. And I don't have the ability to give everyone a pay rise. So what do I do? And I put her onto your program, Bev, and said, you got to watch Bev's program on this. You got to listen to this. Up Is Not the Only Way. You got to look at the lever principle. I said, you need to have those conversations, but you need to arm yourself with the right ability to have those conversations. And that lever framework is what I suggested she use. Because I said, you're going to have an unhappy team otherwise. And she's got a big team of 60 folks, I think, in total. So, yeah, I think it's a very practical way to leverage those kind of conversations, and a great framework to use, and a memorable framework, which is important, Bev.
So I'll take 10% of that, whatever that conversation gave you.
Done. Bev, we got a question from a listener, if you don't mind addressing it. And it's one I love. I know you've answered it before in a previous show, but I wouldn't mind you answering again. And it comes from Jared Wheeler. Hey, Jared, great to have you on the show. And Jared asks, Bev, can you speak about manager versus leader?
Jared, this is a conversation all my colleagues are having. And they're all saying there's a difference, that leaders lead and managers manage, and different. I think it doesn't matter what you call them, that a manager has to lead, has to. And a leader has to manage. So maybe there's not that much different. And, Sharon and I, in talking management throughout the book, we made that statement up front. And leaders have some certain responsibilities that managers don't. But when you take the two words, they both better be doing both. Or else they're not going to last long, I think. Well, that's a good question.
It's an excellent answer, Bev. Thanks for that. I'm gonna just take a comment from another listener, Srinivasa. Great to have you back on the show, Srinivasa. And Srinivasa saying empathy, trust, motivation, tracking mechanisms, a mandate for managers. Maybe not tracking mechanism, but it brings me on to one point, which is I think is your next cluster, which is relationships. And if I can bring up an article that was just recently published in Forbes, Bev, on this topic, 15 ways managers can encourage a mutual relationship of trust with employees. This is a great article that I think all our listeners should read, actually. It comes from Forbes's Coaches Council. So actually it's 15 pieces of advice from 15 different people. So that's what I like. It's got such variety in it. But they're all really based around, I think, relationships and how you build that mutual, which is really important, relationship of trust with employees. Love to know your thoughts on some of these, Bev, and how they fit into that bigger framework, that idea of relationships and the importance of relationships.
Right. But do you want to put up that cluster slide real fast? And I'll just show you the breadth of them. So again, this comes from a ton of research around why people stay. And, one of the biggest that surprised me was the word yield. Because when I read exit interviews, so many said I was micromanaged. And I was never asked about my own skill set. And I was told, do it this way. I never felt the freedom to say, well, here's another idea. So that jumped out. Truth jumped out. That, I really want to know where I stand. Not 6 months later, but in the moment, a bit of feedback would really help. And so here's something interesting. In this book, we married inclusion and engagement because our publisher demanded it. Not that we want to do it, but we learned a lot. And we thought that dignity, show respect, would be the chapter that most talked about inclusion. And when we did our research and we showed diversity, inclusion thought leaders, all 26, and said, can you pick 5? Because we want to build a new cluster and we want to call it belonging. And I thought, great research right from diversity thought leaders. And no one picked the same 5. Maybe just that word dignity was amongst them, but the other 4 were different. And it taught us that inclusion and engagement are connected, whether they're pasted together, Velcroed together, or what, they definitely are connected. And the other word, and one of your questions that you sent me was, how does this form the foundation of trust? I think trust is the compilation of all those things. And the best writer on trust is Paul Zak. He's at Claremont. Paul Zak and Ken Nowak do great research on trust. And when I look through their research, it all fits into the letters, the 26 letters. So I think, and I wrote down, a trust culture is driven by leaders, and 70% of the variance, this is from Paul Zak, in employee engagement is attributed to leaders. So it's leaders doing all these things. And I think that's just so critical. And let's put it up again, Niall, if you could. So I'm going to ask you again, Mr. Smarty, which of these, now you don't have to talk about jerk, because we know you have some jerk behaviors, but I'll talk about that. But which of these do you feel is the hardest for you to do?
So for me, Bev, I look at, I'll read them out. Dignity, show respect. Jerk, don't be one. Question, reconsider the rules. Reward, provide recognition. Truth, tell it. Understand, listen deeper. Yield, power down. I think for me, reward was the one I found was the hardest.
Mm-hmm.
I understand, listen deeper. I'm an interviewer. I've had that instinct for 20 odd years. You do that. Question, reconsider the rules. I break the rules constantly, so no problem there. Dignity, massive believer in fairness all my life, so always try to show respect there. Truth, maybe I'm a bit too truthful sometimes, but I look at reward, and I have to remind myself to stop and say, well done. And it kills me because I know the importance of it. I know that every one of us craves it. And I probably do as well, but maybe I crave it in a different way. And I haven't had a boss for so long as well, right? I forget the importance of that. And, I see amazing work being done all around me by my colleagues and my team, but maybe I don't remember enough to just stop and say, well done. So that's probably the one for me that I think I need to constantly work at. And I will probably have to constantly work at for the rest of my career. But it's just so important.
It is. And I think the subtitle is, what matters more, praise or pay? And I'll tell you, praise matters more. And that's many, many, many of predecessors who've looked at that. But pay will climb up the ladder if it's not fair, if it doesn't feel like it's comparable to other places. Then pay matters, and all the praise you give me starts to go down. And here's the thing with managers, and this is the managers, the why and the how. The why we all know already. People need it. And I hear managers saying, well, I don't have to give it to my high potentials. They know they're high potential. No, they might know it, but hearing it from you makes them feel so much better. And so pay over, and that reward comes in so many different packages. There's all kinds, and reward is only important if you feel it as a reward. I remember sitting on a plane behind some folks, sales folks, who, because of their sales, were being flown to Hawaii. And I was listening to the conversation in front of me. And one woman said to another, I wish they had given us a choice. In order for me to go to Hawaii, I need a babysitter, and I needed this, and I needed that. So, it just doesn't feel good. And I think that we forget that reward is only in the receiver's eyes. And I think that's critical. Johnny, in the book, we give managers 12 sentence starters about how to give praise. And managers literally copy out the page and leave it on their desk so they can remember, different ways to start the sentence. And not just, you did a good job, bye-bye. You did a good job by doing what? What knocked your socks off? What was particularly wonderful? So, yes, that is important. And I'll just say one word about the J for jerk, because everybody asks about it. And when we brought the first book in, the publisher said, "Why do you need a negative thing? They're all kind of positive." And here's what we said: we have to have jerk. Because what we literally did, we took exit interviews that were written out. We asked if we could have them. We followed the person to the next company. And we said, "Here's what you wrote. Why did you really leave?" And they all said, "Well, my boss was a jerk and I couldn't stand it anymore." And we, as good researchers, said, "Well, can you describe that word?" And they did. And they gave us like 50 jerkatudinal characteristics. And the way we deal with that in our workshops is we say to managers, "Have you ever had a jerk boss? Which of these things did that jerk boss do? And what did it do to you?" And when they start saying, "I stopped giving ideas. You know, I dragged myself into work each day." It answers it. And then we can say, "And how are you a jerk?" So, Johnny, privately, we are going to have that discussion.
So I'm gonna bring you, Bev, to our third grouping, right? Which is culture, and our news article comes from Harvard Business Review. It's a very recent publication by HBR by Denise Lee Young, and its company culture is everyone's responsibility. We had your good friend Kevin Oakes on the show last week talking about company culture. I know he's
Right.
got a new book out on renovating culture as well. But what's your perspective on culture, and where does this HBR article fit in terms of it being everyone's responsibility? I think they're trying to compare it to maybe a more traditional view that it's top down and it has to be leader led. But this is more, it has to be infused across the company. But critically, not in such a way that it's no one's responsibility. It's like there are clear levels of ownership and responsibility at every level in the organization. It isn't just fragmented.
Right.
What's
Right.
your experience and research on this? And tell me about what parts of the alphabet did you zone in on for
Okay.
culture?
Okay. Could you put it up again? Um, so, gosh, they're all important. Here's what I'm seeing now in the remote work environment. I am seeing information pop gigantically that I want to be in the know. And I don't know if you're bringing us back, if you're not bringing us back, when you're bringing us back. The rumor mill has never been stronger. And I think now in a remote environment, space is like jumping out because people are working, many of them in different spaces, in spaces that are hard, in spaces where they've got kids and commotion going on. And if managers don't say, "How's it going? Is your home space working for you? Is there anything I can do to make it better?" I think that would be really important. And I'll also give you, Johnny, I might have given it to you before, a list of 26 ways that you can touch your employees remotely and what to ask them. And it's questions about all 26 that might help the team out there. I don't think anyone can be engaged all the time. Impossible. But if you're not engaged any of the time, and culture has a lot to do with it. The picture I once saw when someone was lecturing on culture stuck with me, and it was a big iceberg. And they said, everyone thinks the part sticking up is culture. It is, but it's not as much as the part underwater. And it made me think about all the things we subtly do and we subtly condone others doing. And that's the culture. And a lot of people are talking about it now. And And, maybe the big thing is now managers don't see people in the hallways. We don't walk by their desks. Are we stopping in, to ask, how's it going? And that's part of culture. So it's all important, but that information and space. And the other one I would see is jumping out now in front of us is wellness. Wellness meaning every point of my life. The stress I'm feeling now and how it's upsetting me. It's not, do I have COVID or not? It's bigger than a bread box, and it's important now.
It's funny. They're exactly the ones I would have thought you would have touched on. And information, it's a big issue, just the lack of it, lack of clarity of information, and the assumption that everyone does understand, and they may not have, picked up on the Slack message or read the email, and understanding if it's been sent, delivered, but has it been understood is a big challenge as well. The wellness piece, I've had several conversations on this. We had a guest on our Monday all hands. The first Monday of every month, Bev, we have a guest contributor who comes, and we deliberately, we haven't invited you because we generally avoid people who are on our platform. I'm really sorry, but we actually want to make it special to our staff that we're it's not the people that we're using in our product. It's really, we just brought this person for you and only you. And it's also at 9 a.m. Irish time. So I'm not going to wake you up at 1 a.m, but we had a great presenter this week. And we talked about that wellness piece. And we talked about how people have distractions and how to manage those distractions. And distractions can be a negative word, but distractions could be, you have a family member sick, or you're worried about your kids, or are you being a good enough parent? And it's kind of saying they're really important things, but it's all of those things exist for all of us, and they stop you from getting your work done and completing things, which causes you more stress as well. And really, it's about how you manage those, and that whole focus is so important. And we've gravitated internally in Social Talent towards more and more conversations that genuinely are about wellness on a first Monday, because it's just so important and affects all of us, and we're all struggling, and it's just creating that space to address it. I think a few years ago, Bev, definitely the first time you probably wrote the book, it maybe wasn't accepted that you would have those conversations in work, that it's the employer's responsibility to even drive those. It's just, it has to be these days, doesn't it?
Right. And it's funny, at the back of the book, we give 3 or 4 other books that are right on that topic, that are, of course, written by my publishers, authors, but they all expand on the topic. And, in my own office, what we do is we always say, how was your weekend? And then we always really listen to how the weekend was, because it tells you your mood, for coming in. And we have a rule that if you're having a bad day, announce it. Because otherwise we're going to read everything else into it. And that's harder. It makes life in the office harder.
It's a really good point, and it comes from, there's a whole bunch of things that tie some of these things together, Bev. One of the topics that we didn't get to talk about was psychological safety. I know you and I have spoken on it before, which is actually not something that is top down at all, to the last point. It's something that exists within every single team. And you can't say that an organization has or doesn't have psychological safety. It is on a team level. It's the importance of middle managers. I think that was brought up in the second article we touched on today, that middle managers are unbelievably critical in driving culture, in driving change, and their relationships with their teams is so critical. Oftentimes we think of the leadership and executive, and then we think of the individual contributors, and we forget about this massive middle management who are just so integral to any of this change, and are the day-to-day folks who show up for their teams, who are actually implementing the actions or promises of the organization, or are the face of the organization to most people in a large company. And it's just trying to reach those folks and recognize the importance of those. I do like that culture piece being, it's got to be across the board. But you mentioned earlier as well, Bev, in the career kind of development conversation, it isn't just up to the leader / manager, depending on your perspective on that.
Right.
The individual has to take ownership as well. And I think that goes for culture as well. Like, it's not just about culture happens to me, throw the culture at me and I either like it or I don't. It's like, we are all invested in culture. We're all invested in career development. It isn't a one-way thing. It isn't a, shine this upon me. And if I'm happy, I'll stay. And if I'm not, I'll leave. It has to be two-way, isn't it?
And in fact, we did write the sequel to Love because managers said to us, is it all on my shoulders? And we said, duh, no, it's not. So we wrote another book called Love It, Don't Leave It, 26 Ways to Get What You Want at Work. And it says it's your responsibility, Ms. or Ms. team member, to ask for what you want and to follow up on it, etc. I think at the time it came out, which was years ago, organizations, we did a whole training program on it, were saying, oh, now managers are going to get asked for more things. And well, yeah. And so it did not sell as well as it should have. But it's
funny. I think it was one of those, I think it was the article from HBR when they focused on middle managers, Bev, that we looked at a few minutes ago, that brought up the point. It said, managers, when you're having a conversation, let's say one is the trend, obviously, that engagement conversations aren't once a year thing anymore. It has to be much more regular than that, quarterly, monthly, weekly, whatever it is. But it said always start by asking, what do you think of me? And what can I, not what do you think of me? What can I do to help you? And we got a great comment from Julie West, who's listening live. And Julie's just saying that her boss asked that very thing. What can I do to help you do your job better? And she says she still remembers it from 35 years ago. And that's a good boss.
And hopefully he listened to what you said, he or she, Julie, and said, well, I can't do that. My hands are tied on that. But tell me more.
Yeah.
Because there's always more you could say to him to find something he could do. Good question.
100%. It's a great question, a great comment coming in. And it's great. I think 35 years later, I think not enough managers are doing that. So Bev, remind us just in summation, those three kind of clusters, what were they again? In terms of being this kind of engaged leader, engaged manager. Remind me of those three clusters again.
I will. So not only will I'm going to surprise you, not only will I remind you, but the clusters the clusters are the alphabet, and they are.
And sorry, for those listening to the podcast and who weren't viewing this, Bev just stood up and showed me a brand new t-shirt she has with all the letters of the alphabet and a big heart and love going through them. So I love you. Brilliant. I love that, Bev. I love that.
So, and let me say, so their development, their relationships, and their culture. But let me mention quickly, there are 4 letters that we couldn't fit into one of those clusters. And we realized they were success drivers, that they had to be. The A, the B, the N, and the Z. The A is for ask. Every single one of those requires that a manager asks a question. The B is for buck. And every one of those demands that the manager do something if they can. And if not, they ask the what else question. Or they say, I can't do that. The N is for numbers. If any manager around this world doubts that this is important and worth your time, then just run the numbers and you'll see how expensive it is to lose talent. A, B, N, and the Z is zenith. Zenith means you'll never reach it because you got to do it over and over and over, and it's different for everybody. So, and any company out there, you can choose 4 or 5 letters, maybe the initials of your organization, teach that. And we do, of course, have training programs and everything else to go with it. So follow the ABCs, and you can get a home run.
Bev, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Congratulations on the 6th edition of the book again. I think it's wonderful. It's great to see this kind of evergreen content that just resonates over the years with folks. It's fantastic, and I'm so glad to have you back on the show. We'll have you back again. I know I've asked you twice already. I'm going to ask you a third time because you've already done it even in this show. But any last tip you can leave our audience with today to add to our shortlist?
And this is just hitting me. I would say, manager, think about what you want from your own manager to do a better job. And number one, tell your manager that. And then start the conversation by asking your people. I looked at these 26 and I realized I'm not so good at, or I want more of. Tell me what you want more of. That's a great conversation. It's all about conversation. It's all about conversation.
It's great. And no better woman for a conversation, Bev. Always love chatting to you. Thank you for joining us this morning, all the way from California, from your home. Are you in Santa Barbara, LA this morning? Where are you today?
We're LA.
You're in LA this morning. Well, I hope the day is good to you, Bev. Thank you so much for joining us again. It's been a pleasure to have you. We'll have you back on the show again. And good luck with the 6th edition of the book. If folks want to buy the book or read more, Amazon, where else can they get it?
All over. All over.
Love Him or Lose Him is the title of the book. Dr. Beverly Kaye is the author. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Bev, we'll have you on again. And next week, we are welcoming you back to another great show. Please do come back next week on Wednesday, the 10th of March. We are going to have live, if you can join us at 4 o'clock. That's UK time, Ireland time. That's going to be, I think midnight in Singapore. Or you can join us at 11 a.m. on the East Coast, 8 a.m. on the West Coast of the US. We're going to have our good friend Torrin Ellis, diversity strategist and author and host of his Sirius FM show in the US, joining us to talk about international voices. That's particularly diversity stories from around the world. We've had such a big focus on diversity and equity in the last year, a lot of it coming out of the US, that we wanted to try to take a moment and just look at a more broader perspective of different levels of diversity and equity, and from a more global perspective, what's happening around the world, what are the other aspects of diversity perhaps don't get as much airtime as gender and race do at the moment, and not to take away from either of those, but just to really bring some more color, more of a story to the other, perhaps less talked about areas of diversity, inclusivity, and equity. So delighted to basically have Torrin join us next week. If that's of interest to you, which it should be, if you are a human being, come back and join us. You can check us out in the live show, or you can watch the recordings, or find us on podcasts on Spotify or Apple. As always, you can find everything you need to know about the Shortlist show. Subscribe to further updates by going to socialtalent.com/the shortlist. Meanwhile, I'll leave you with your hopeful spring morning, spring afternoon, spring day. If you haven't tried it, you should try next week listening to the show through just your auditory senses on your earphones. Take a walk with us, or if you have the time, join us live. We'd love to hear your questions and thoughts for Torrin as well. Until then, have a good spring day. We'll see you next week.